And then finally, what we'll see is worship. And that's starting in chapter 24. If you want to turn over to 24, Israel affirms the covenant. And then Moses in verse 9 of chapter 24 goes up in the mountain with God, and he meets God face to face. And God there shows him, and I love, if you look at verse 9, it says, Moses went up also with Aaron and Nadab and Abihu and the 70 of the elders of Israel, and they saw the God of Israel. And that's what worship is all about. In fact, I was sharing, I'll give you a little foretaste. I was sharing with the elders, and I think we're pretty much agreed on this, so I can share it with you, that I'm really looking forward to dedicating this building. I told him, I said, do you know how God instructed his people to dedicate things in the Old Testament? It's really exciting. They put the choirs out front. And the choirs were with trumpets and musicians going, and they were all singing, and the people were shouting about how great God was, and they all marched around, and that's how they did it. And there was none of this, putting booze bottles and bursting them against things and, cutting ribbons and all that stuff. They are praising God, and they're shouting. I have a really good friend. We served as elders together, and dear friend and man of God in another state. He's come to the conclusion that there's no place for musical instruments or anything like that in the church. He thinks it's wrong. And I thought, if God, who doesn't change, is so excited about music that he has trumpets and he has 4,000 musicians and singers going before, and at the sound of music they're splitting, and when they got to the crescendo, it says the glory of God came down and filled the house, and it became so powerfully full of God's glory that nobody could get near it, and it scared them and it says they just fell down and they said, the Lord is great. Do you think all of a sudden he changed his mind, he doesn't like musical instruments now? I mean, it's just, it's amazing how much vicissitude there is in Christendom nowadays. But look at verse 10. They saw the God of Israel. If you worship, you see God. If you haven't seen God lately, you haven't been worshiping lately. I met someone this morning that was visiting our church from another church, and they were talking to me afterward, and they are all enamored with a book that's come out by a missiologist that says we only have missions today because the church is missing its job of leading people in worship. Because everyone's supposed to be worshiping God, but we haven't gone to all the nations and taught them how to worship God, and so we have to have missionaries go out there and do it. And what this person contends is that the more we worship and the more we, look at verse 10, see the God of Israel. And there was under his feet, as it were, a paved work of sapphire. And it was like the very heavens in its clarity. Now, what does it say in Revelation 4? I saw a sea of glass. Have you ever been in the South Pacific and seen a sunset? Or anywhere and seen a sunset over the ocean? Especially when you're out in the water. What happens is when the sun comes down, the water looks like it's on fire. Because it's just glittering like this. And it's like a sea of fire. And that's how it describes the throne of God. That it's like a crystal sea with fire underneath it. It's just glistening. And the throne, and it's surrounded. And can you imagine, instead of having, blue carpet, which is wonderful, can you imagine having crystal clear, like glass with fire radiating upward, and have no ceiling, no roof, and have no borders, and just to have an endless sea glittering up the fire and have the throne of God. That's what they saw. I mean, what an amazing thing to see. And the very heavens and its clarity. They were worshiping God. You know what God was saying? How would you like to experience that all the time? Come on down to my tent, and I'll let you experience that. That's what the tabernacle was. It was bringing them into the presence of God, worshiping a holy God, seeing God in all of His glory all the time, and you didn't have to climb the mountain. You just had to come to the tent. Now, let me ask you, when you got up this morning and knew it was going to rain, is that what you thought about when you came here? Were you all excited to see? Look back at verse 10. To see God, if you didn't see Him, you didn't worship. See, that's what it's all about. We fall short so often in our lives. And I don't mean you personally or me personally. I mean us collectively as Christians. We're content to do everything except what we were created to do and to be. Remember what the Scriptures describe salvation as? It says in Philippians 3:20, for we are the circumcision. See, we don't have the ceremonial law. We don't surgically mark people anymore, men, for being in the covenant. God circumcises everyone's heart. By the way, he always has. He just did the outside circumcision as a reminder that they're supposed to have a circumcised heart. That's what the new birth, that's what regeneration is, getting a new heart, a new spirit. He says, for we are the circumcision which worship God in the Spirit. Do you know what the first evidence of a born-again person is? Not their baptismal certificate, not them saying, oh, it was 1956 at the crusade, No. Do you worship God in your spirit? Do you see God? Do you see Him in His Word? Do you sometimes get so overwhelmed with God that it just moves you entirely? Oh, no. I'm not one of those kind. I'm real prim and proper. I don't get emotional. You should. You really should. And one thing we're going to see is Old Testament worship was loud, everyone was involved, and it was wholehearted. And that's what God carries through to eternity. Can you imagine hundreds of millions, billions of voices all together? It'd be pretty loud. Be louder than these guys were this morning. Second service was louder than first service, you know. They thought you guys liked this, so they kept turning it up. It was great. But can you imagine hundreds of millions and all of us together, not in a hurry, not looking at our watch to see, oh, boy, don't want to miss that. I mean, we won't have anywhere else to go. We're there. Well, the book of Exodus, number 1 is about salvation, how to get out of the world. Number 2 is about sanctification, how to get under the Word. Finally, it's about worship, how to get our lives focused unto worship.